Zainab had always believed in signs from the universe. So when she found a vintage Valentine's card tucked inside a second-hand book she bought at a market in Seoul, she took it seriously. The card was old, dated 1987, and written in both Korean and English. "To my Valentine, meet me where the cherry blossoms bloom. I'll wait for you forever. M." She was standing in that very market, Gwangjang Market, on a frigid February morning, examining the card when someone bumped into her from behind. Her coffee went flying, splashing all over a tall Korean man's white shirt. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Zainab cried, mortified. The man looked down at his ruined shirt, then up at her, and instead of anger, he smiled. "It's okay. I needed an excuse to skip my morning meeting anyway." His name was Min-jae, and he had the warmest eyes Zainab had ever seen. He insisted on buying her another coffee to replace the one she'd spilled, and they ended up talking for 2 hours at a nearby cafe. She told him she was from Lagos, Nigeria, and had moved to Seoul 6 months ago to work as a cultural liaison for an international NGO. He told her he was a photographer who specialized in documenting disappearing Korean traditions. "What's that?" Min-jae asked, noticing the vintage Valentine's card she kept fidgeting with. Zainab showed it to him, explaining how she'd found it. Min-jae's expression changed, became serious as he studied the card. "This handwriting," he said slowly. "I know this handwriting. This is my grandfather's." The coincidence seemed impossible, but Min-jae was certain. His grandfather had passed away 5 years ago, and his grandmother had died long before Min-jae was born. His grandfather had rarely spoken about her, but Min-jae's mother had told him that his grandmother was his grandfather's great love, and he'd never fully recovered from losing her. "He must have written this for her," Min-jae said, touching the card gently. "But I don't know why it ended up in a used book." "Maybe it's a sign," Zainab said softly, "that we were supposed to meet." Min-jae looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between them. "Maybe it is." They exchanged numbers, and Min-jae promised to ask his mother about the card. But even after they parted ways, Zainab couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something magnetic about Min-jae, something that made her want to know everything about him. He texted her that evening. "My mother cried when she saw the card. She has a story to tell us. Dinner tomorrow." The next night, Zainab met Min-jae and his mother, Mrs. Park, at a traditional Korean restaurant. Mrs. Park was elegant and gracious, and she studied Zainab with curious but kind eyes before beginning her story. Min-jae's grandfather had been a photographer too, she explained. In 1987, he'd fallen in love with a foreign woman who was visiting Korea. She was a teacher from somewhere in Africa. Mrs. Park couldn't remember exactly where. They'd had a brief, intense romance, but she'd had to return home. Min-jae's grandfather had written that Valentine's card planning to give it to her, but she'd left before he could. Heartbroken, he'd tucked it into a book and tried to move on. He eventually married someone else, Min-jae's grandmother, and they'd had a good life together. But Mrs. Park said her father-in-law always kept a certain sadness in his eyes, especially around Valentine's Day. "Why are you crying?" Min-jae asked Zainab gently. Zainab hadn't realized tears were streaming down her face. "It's so sad. They never got their goodbye, never got to see if their love could have survived." Min-jae reached across the table and took her hand. "Maybe that's why we found each other, to finish their story." Over the following weeks, Min-jae and Zainab became inseparable. He took her all over Seoul, photographing her in traditional places, teaching her Korean customs. She introduced him to Nigerian food, taught him Yoruba phrases, showed him Nollywood films that made him laugh until he cried. Every moment together felt electric, inevitable, like they'd been moving toward each other their whole lives. On their 1-month anniversary, Min-jae took Zainab to Uido Park. "The cherry blossoms won't bloom for another month," he said, "but I wanted to bring you here anyway. This is where my grandfather used to come every spring. My mother said he'd stand under the cherry trees for hours, just remembering." "Remembering her," Zainab said softly. "Yeah," Min-jae turned to face her, taking both her hands. "Zainab, I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other a month, but I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I fell in love with you the moment you spilled coffee all over me. Zainab laughed through sudden tears. I'm falling in love with you too. I think I have been since I found that card, like the universe was preparing me to meet you. They kissed under the bare cherry trees, and Zainab felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But as their relationship deepened, reality began to intrude. Min-jae's mother, who had been so warm at first, grew distant. She started making comments about how difficult cross-cultural relationships were, how much easier Min-jae's life would be with a Korean woman. She never said anything directly cruel, but the implications were clear. Then there was Min-jae's ex-girlfriend, Haewon. She'd heard he was dating someone new and started showing up places she knew he'd be. She was beautiful, successful, and Korean. She made sure Zainab knew that she and Min-jae had dated for 3 years, that their families had expected them to marry. Why did you break up? Zainab asked Min-jae after a particularly uncomfortable encounter with Haewon. Because I didn't love her the way she deserved to be loved, Min-jae said honestly. We were together because it made sense, because our families approved, because it was easy. But there was no passion, no real connection, not like what I have with you. Zainab wanted to believe him, but doubt was creeping in. She'd been in Seoul for less than a year. She didn't fully understand the culture, the unspoken rules, the weight of family expectations. What if she was making Min-jae's life harder? What if his mother was right? The crisis came in early April, just as the cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom. Zainab's work visa was expiring, and her company was restructuring. They couldn't guarantee they could renew her visa. She had 2 months to either find new employment that would sponsor her or return to Nigeria. She told Min-jae over dinner, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm going to fight to stay. I'll find something, but if I can't, then I'll come with you, Min-jae said immediately. What? To Nigeria. I'll come with you. I'm a photographer, I can work anywhere. If you have to leave Korea, I'm not letting you go alone. Zainab's heart swelled, but fear followed quickly. Min-jae, you can't just uproot your entire life for me. Your work is here, your family is here. You're here, that's all that matters. But when Min-jae told his mother his plan, she was devastated. She begged him to reconsider, argued that he was throwing away his career, his future, for a relationship that was still so new. She called Zainab and asked to meet her privately. They met at a cafe, and Mrs. Park was blunt. I like you, Zainab, but I love my son, and I can see this relationship is going to cause him pain. If you really love him, you'll let him go. Let him build a life here with someone who fits into his world. Don't make him choose between you and everything else he loves. Zainab left that meeting feeling shattered. She spent 3 days barely eating, barely sleeping, wrestling with the horrible thought that maybe Mrs. Park was right. Maybe loving Min-jae meant letting him go. On the 4th day, she made her decision. She met Min-jae at Uedo Park, where the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, pale pink petals drifting through the air like snow. I'm going back to Nigeria, she said without preamble, and I'm going alone. Min-jae's face went white. What? No, Zainab, we can figure this out. Your mother came to see me. She's right, Min-jae. I can't ask you to give up everything for me. We've only known each other 3 months. That's not enough to base a whole life on. It's enough for me, Min-jae said desperately. Zainab, I love you. I don't care about the rest. But I do, Zainab was crying now. I care that your mother looks at me with disappointment. I care that I don't fit into your world. I care that everyone thinks this is a mistake. Maybe they're right. Maybe we got caught up in some romantic fantasy about finishing your grandfather's story, but real life isn't a fairy tale. Don't do this, Min-jae pleaded. Don't give up on us because you're scared. I'm not scared, I'm being realistic. She took off the necklace he'd given her, a delicate silver chain with a camera pendant, and pressed it into his hand. I'll never forget you, but this is goodbye. She walked away while cherry blossoms fell around her like tears from heaven, and she didn't look back even though every step felt like dying. Zainab returned to Lagos with a broken heart. She threw herself into work, taking a position with a different NGO that had her traveling across West Africa. She told herself she'd made the right choice, that Min-jae was probably already moving on, maybe even getting back together with Haewon. But at night, alone in hotel rooms across the continent, she'd look at photos of them together and wonder if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. 3 months passed, then 6. Zainab was in Ghana for a project when she got an email that changed everything. It was from Mrs. Park. "Dear Zainab, I owe you an apology. After you left, Min-jae was devastated. He barely ate, barely worked. I was happy at first, thinking he'd get over you quickly, but he didn't. And watching him suffer, I realized I'd been wrong. I was so focused on protecting him from potential pain that I caused him real pain. I was scared of the unknown, of the challenges a cross-cultural relationship might bring. But I see now that the only thing that truly matters is that he loves you and you love him. He won't tell you this, but he's been learning Yoruba. He's planning a photography exhibition about Nigeria, spending every spare moment researching your culture, your country. He's trying to understand your world the way you tried to understand his. I don't know if you still love my son, but if you do, please give him another chance. Give us another chance. I promise I'll do better. Mrs. Park." Attached to the email were photos. Min-jae in a Yoruba language class. Min-jae at an African art gallery. Min-jae cooking jollof rice in his kitchen, concentration fierce on his face. And one photo that made Zainab's heart stop. Min-jae standing under bare cherry trees, holding a sign that read, "Still waiting for my Valentine." Zainab booked a flight to Seoul that night. She arrived on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. She went straight to Uido Park, where the trees were still bare and winter brown. Min-jae wasn't there, but she sat under the trees anyway, clutching the vintage Valentine's card that had started everything, and waited. Hours passed. The sun set. Zainab was freezing, starting to think this was a terrible idea when she heard footsteps behind her. "Zainab." She turned to find Min-jae standing there, looking thinner than she remembered, tired but so beautiful it hurt. He was holding a camera. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "Your mother sent me photos of you learning Yoruba, researching Nigeria." Min-jae, "Why?" "Because I love you," he said simply. "Because when you left, you took everything good with you. I don't want a life that makes sense if it doesn't include you. I want a life that's messy and complicated and cross-cultural and challenging. I want a life with you in it." Zainab stood up, closing the distance between them. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I ran away. I was scared and I let that fear make my decisions. But I've spent 6 months miserable without you, and I don't want to waste any more time. I love you, Min-jae. I love you enough to fight for us this time." He dropped his camera and pulled her into his arms, kissing her like he'd been drowning and she was air. Cherry tree branches swayed above them in the winter wind, and Zainab thought about Min-jae's grandfather, who'd waited under these trees every spring for a love that never returned. "We're going to finish their story," she whispered against his lips. "We're going to get it right this time." "Yeah," Min-jae agreed, smiling through tears. "We are." The next day was Valentine's Day. Min-jae took Zainab to meet his mother again, and this time Mrs. Park embraced her warmly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome. I'm sorry I put my fears above my son's happiness. Please forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Zainab said, hugging her back. "You were protecting someone you love. I understand that." They spent Valentine's Day together, the 3 of them, cooking a meal that blended Korean and Nigerian dishes. Mrs. Park asked Zainab to teach her about Nigerian culture, and she listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, but it was a start. Over the next months, Zainab and Min-jae navigated the complicated logistics of an international relationship. Zainab found a position with an NGO that had offices in both Seoul and Lagos, allowing her to split her time. Min-jae started working on a documentary about cross-cultural love, interviewing couples who'd made it work despite the odds. His mother became their biggest supporter. She started taking Yoruba lessons herself, learning to cook Nigerian food, researching Zainab's culture with the same intensity Min-jae had. She told Zainab that watching her son come back to life had taught her that love was worth any challenge. On Valentine's Day the following year, Exactly 2 years after Zainab had found that vintage card, Min-jae took her back to Uido Park. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, creating a canopy of pink and white above them. "My grandfather wrote that card for the woman he loved," Min-jae said. "He wanted to meet her where the cherry blossoms bloom. He wanted to give her forever, but he never got the chance." He pulled out the original card, now framed and preserved, and showed it to Zainab again. Then he got down on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Zainab Ademi, I want to finish their story. I want to meet you here, where the cherry blossoms bloom, and I want to give you forever. Will you marry me?" Zainab was crying so hard she could barely speak, but she managed to say yes. Yes to second chances. Yes to fighting for love across cultures and continents. Yes to writing a better ending than the generation before them had gotten. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that beautifully blended Korean and Nigerian traditions. Zainab wore a hanbok for the traditional Korean ceremony and changed into an iro and buba for the Nigerian celebration. Min-jae looked handsome in both his traditional Korean clothing and the agbada he wore for the Nigerian portion of the wedding. Mrs. Park danced at the reception, learning Nigerian dance steps from Zainab's mother, both women crying happy tears and bonding over their shared love for their children. Min-jae's friends and Zainab's family mixed and mingled, language barriers overcome by universal joy. During their first dance, Min-jae whispered to Zainab, "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for coming back." "Thank you for waiting for me," Zainab whispered back. "Thank you for loving me enough to fight." They moved between Seoul and Lagos over the years that followed, building a life that honored both their cultures. They had challenges, moments when cultural differences caused friction, times when long distance was hard. But they faced everything together, choosing each other again and again. On their 5th Valentine's Day as a married couple, they returned to Uido Park with their 3-year-old daughter. She was a beautiful mix of both of them, with Min-jae's eyes and Zainab's smile, speaking Korean and Yoruba with equal fluency. As their daughter ran through the falling cherry blossoms, laughing with pure joy, Min-jae pulled Zainab close. "Do you think my grandfather can see us?" he asked. "Do you think he knows his story got a happy ending after all?" Zainab looked up at the cherry blossoms, at the pink petals dancing in the spring breeze, and smiled. "I think he knows. I think he's been guiding us all along, making sure we didn't make the same mistakes he did, making sure love won this time." A cherry blossom petal landed on her hand, and Zainab held it carefully, like the precious gift it was. Their daughter ran back to them, demanding to be lifted up so she could catch the falling petals, and Min-jae swung her into his arms while Zainab wrapped her arms around them both. This was the ending Min-jae's grandfather had dreamed of but never got to live. A love that survived distance and cultural differences and fear and doubt. A love that created new life, new traditions, new possibilities. A love that proved that Valentine's Day could be about hope instead of heartbreak, about second chances instead of missed opportunities, about fighting for happiness instead of accepting loss. The cherry blossoms fell like blessings around them, and Zainab knew that somewhere, somehow, Min-jae's grandfather and his lost love were smiling. Their story had found its happy ending at last, written in the lives of two people who'd refused to give up on each other, who'd chosen love over fear, who'd proven that some things really are worth crossing oceans for. And every Valentine's Day after that, they returned to those cherry trees, renewing their promise to each other, celebrating the love that had started with a vintage card and a spilled cup of coffee, and teaching their children that true love isn't about everything being easy. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, and then fighting with everything you have. If you enjoyed this romantic, thrilling story, like, subscribe, comment where you are watching from, and share with loved ones.